ربما تسأل أحدهم هل تؤمن بالله فيقول لا أنا أؤمن بالعلم، فكأن العلم أخذ دور الإله والعياذ بالله. سنتحدث في هذه الخطبة أيها الإخوة عن هذه المسألة تحديدا، علاقة الدين بالعلم ووظيفة العلم ودور العلم وحدود العلم، وهل المعرفة قاصرة فقط على العلم والعلم التجريبي أم لا؟ هذه من أهم الأسس في علاقتك مع الله عز وجل، لأنها بنيان وأساس. People, when you ask some people, do you believe in God? They would say, no, we believe in science. As if science is replacing God, وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. As if science is taking the rule of God. So in this khutbah, we'll talk about this point, the limits of science, the function of science, and the relationship between science and faith. And is science or empirical proofs the only way to gain knowledge or not? We should understand the first point we'll talk about is العلم أيها الإخوة لا يمكن أن يأخذ دور الإله لأن العلم يكتشف القانون والقانون يفسر الظواهر الطبيعية ولا يخلقها. So the first fact we want to start with, as I said, it is completely irrational to believe that science replaces God. So forget the deen now. Forget your preconceptions. Let's talk reasonably. Let's talk with reason and logic. So science logically cannot replace God. Why? Because science tells us about the laws. And the point of the laws is to explain the natural phenomenon. It is not to create. So this is a key sentence. Laws explain, they do not create. So when we discover the gravity, it doesn't mean that we don't need God. It just explained how things worked. That is why if we, for example, if you studied how the radio works, and you studied all the laws of physics that is connected with how the radio works, does this mean that we can conclude that there is no maker, there is no inventor of the radio, because I was able to figure out how the radio works? So same thing here. Just because you were able to figure out how the world works and how the world functions and what are the laws that govern the running of the world does not mean that there is no God. Actually, it indicates that there must be God. Because when we're saying there is a laws that govern A and B, this means two things. First, who caused A and B to exist? And second, who made the laws that connects A to B? So still you cannot exclude God or rule out God from these discoveries. So even as some scholars said, just the fact that you are, as a scientist, that you are expecting to find out the laws, it indicates that you have implicit affirmation that there must be God. That you subconsciously believe that there is order and there is design. And this is what a scientist usually starts with. He starts with the assumption that there are laws and he's looking for a meaning. This means that he is subconsciously believes that there is order, there is design. So there is no contradiction between believing in laws that govern the world and believing in God, because God is the one who created the laws. When we talked about this 2 weeks ago, that is why some atheists, in a very irrational way, in order to justify the existence, they would say, we have to assume that there is imagined time and imagined laws of gravity before anything existed. That is why we talked about this also 2 weeks ago, that another atheist contradicted that and said, these supernatural laws that existed before existence is nothing more than talking about God. So you have no other way but to talk about the one who invented the laws. So just because you discovered the laws does not mean that you rule out the laws. That is why Imam Ibn al-Qayyim, rahimahullah ta'ala, in his book, and it's really a very difficult book called Shifa'ul Alil. I mean, the title doesn't suggest that it's an easy book, but this book is, some scholars say this is the PhD of Imam Ibn al-Qayyim. So he said, لو تتبعنا ما يفيد إثبات الأسباب في القرآن والسنة لزاد على 10,000 موضع ولم نقل ذلك مبالغة بل حقيقة. يقول, if we looked for the causes in the Quran, say the physical laws, the laws of physics in the Quran, he didn't say that, but this is what he means by the causes. Why A happens, or what determines when B will happen, how B or A depends on A and B. He said, if we search for the causes in the Quran and the Sunnah, we'll find more than 10,000 examples. And he's saying this is not an exaggeration, this is a fact. And let's give you an example. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, for example, attributed many actions in the Quran to the wind, to the mountains, to the earth. It's not because the earth is independent and it works on its own, but it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who's putting these laws in these means and mediums. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in Surah Al-A'raf, chapter 7, ayah 57, وَهُوَ الَّذِي يُرْسِلُ الرِّيَاحَ بُشْرًا بَيْنَ يَدَيْ رَحْمَتِهِ. It is Allah who sends the wind as good news of His mercy. حَتَّى إِذَا أَقَلَّتْ سَحَابًا ثِقَالًا. When these winds carry heavy clouds, سُقْنَاهُ لِبَلَدٍ مَيِّتٍ. We'll drive these clouds to a land that is dead. فَأَنزَلْنَا بِهِ الْمَاءِ. So therewith we send down water. فأنزلنا به الماء فأخرجنا به من كل الثمرات. And with water will bring forth all of the fruits. Again, it is Allah talking about the causes, talking about the laws, how things work. And this does not contradict that there is an inventor of the law. The same thing when we're talking about the fact that laws explain, they do not create. Don't be deceived by that. Laws, القوانين تكشف ولا تفسر ولا تخلق. It's common sense, but this is what many scientists would do a lot of mistakes, because many scientists did not study philosophy or logic, so they come up with crazy conclusions literally. So let's take مثلا another issue. When it comes to laws, according to quantum mechanics, many scholars agree that laws are not based on determinism. يعني القوانين ليست حتمية. يعني ما ينفعش صحيح في قوانين ثابتة وما اعرفش والشمس بتشرق كل يوم من الشرق لكن ممكن يجي يوم تشرق من المغرب. القوانين ليست حتمية 100%. هناك احتمالات ممكن يحصل شيء. وهذا يقودنا إلى الإيمان بالمعجزات. We also, based on this, the laws explain they do not create. We have a space to believe in miracles. Believing in miracles does not mean that we're naive people or it is irrational, because there is a maker of the law. The law itself does not create. So I can believe in the miracles. The miracles are possible in that regard. And as I said, in quantum physics, laws are not determined 100%. There are possibilities. And many scientists talk about this. But regardless of it is determinism or choice, it's still there is someone supervising these laws, inventing these laws, controlling these laws. So العلم أيها الإخوة يخبرنا عن قوانين هي في ذاتها قواعد عامة ناتجة عن استقراء وملاحظة. Science tells us about the laws that are usually generalizations based on some observations. So they made some observations, they came up with a law. And they found out that this law works many times, works consistently, but this doesn't mean that it can never be broken. So when we're talking about miracles, it is not a violation of reason and rationality. Miracles are violation of habits, are violations of the many observations we witnessed, but it's not violation of reason. That is why Muslim scholars in the Middle Ages, when they were defining miracles, they would say, Al-Mu'jiza Amrun Khariqun Lil-'Adah. They would say a miracle is something that violates the habits. It doesn't violate reason. Let me give you an example. Imagine, for example, you have a stream and it has a lot of fish and it has been in this place for a long time. And according to ecology, these fish are used to get a specific type of food, specific amount of food. And once I decided to pour out a big, huge amount of food in that place. To the fish, that is a miracle. Because that contradicts all the laws that these fishes are used to. And when these fish would tell the coming generations that one day we had like a sea of food and we couldn't know what to do with that food, it was like miraculous. The fish will say, this is impossible because according to the laws, remember the laws that they are used to, but these are not determined 100%. It can be broken. And we, in our في تراثنا الإمام الغزالي أشار إلى هذه النقطة مع أنه خالف رأي الجمهور في هذه النقطة، لكن كان بقدر عالي من الذكاء. ولذلك الناس اللي بتلوم الإمام الغزالي ولا فهم شيء في أي شيء. المهم الإمام الغزالي رحمه الله تعالى بيقول النار، بقول الكلام ده مع أن أغلب علماء المسلمين قالوا لا، بس هو في ناس كتير لم يفهموا الرازي في هذه المسألة. بيقول النار لا تحرق لأنها نار، بيقول النار تحرق لأن الله أودع فيها القدرة على الإحراق عند ملاقاة جسم ما. عند، وكلمة عند فرق كبير بين عند وبسبب. هل النار تحرق أو الشيء اتحرق بسبب النار ولا عند وصول النار إليه؟ فهو بيقول عند مش بسبب، لأن النار ما فيهاش قوة ذاتية تحرق، لكن ربنا هو اللي قدر الحرق لما النار جاءت جنب الشيء. اللسان ده ايه اللي بيخليه ينطق والايد ما تنطقش؟ هو اللسان فيه حاجة بتقول لا انا لازم انطق؟ طب ما ممكن يوم القيامة يوم تشهد عليهم ألسنتهم وأيديهم وأرجلهم، ممكن يوم القيامة كل شيء، ممكن هذا العضو كان هو اللي ينطق، لكن الإمام الغزالي بيقول بحكم العادة احنا اعتدنا ان هو اللي بينطق، اعتدنا ان النار هي اللي تحرق. زي ما قلت المسألة فيها خلاف، لكن كلامه كلام علمي الآن، كلامه الآن كلام علمي، حتى لو فيه احتمال أقل من يعني من أتفه نسبة يظل المسألة موجودة. وده كما قلت يسمح لمسألة لمسألة المعجزات. So even Imam al-Ghazali said the fire burns not because it is fire, but because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the law that once it touches something it will cause the burning, not because the fire itself will burn. But anyway, the majority of scholars disagree with Imam al-Ghazali. But so this is the first point. The laws explain, they do not create. Don't tell me, I believe in science, I don't have to. أنت مش فاهم أي شيء. مش فاهم أي شيء. The second point is empirical knowledge the only way for attaining knowledge؟ يعني هل العلم التجريبي الناشئ عن التجربة هو الطريق الوحيد فقط للمعرفة؟ في ناس بتقول الراجل ده بيتكلم على ايه؟ والله أيها الإخوة الكلام اللي بقوله هذا كان ألف باء ما يعلمه عوام المسلمين في القرون الوسطى. الكلام اللي أنا بقوله ده هو ألف باء، مش كلام علماء. الكلام اللي أنا بقوله مش كلام علماء. والله أنا قاعد أحضر بقدر الإمكان من العشاء، من العشاء امبارح لحد الآن قاعد أحضر عشان ما أقولش كلام صعب، لأن ده كلام عادي جدا جدا جدا. وأحيانا أتحرج من تسجيل الخطب لأن مستواها ضعيف، لأن ما فيش مساحة أشرح. والإمام الفضالي له كتاب اسمه عقيدة العوام، لو قريتها ما هتفهمش منها ولا كلمة. عقائد العوام. المهم بيقول العلم يعني ايه المعرفة؟ احنا بنعرف الاشياء ازاي؟ بيسموه دلوقتي الابستمولوجي. How do we know things? Is it only through التجربة experiment? Do we gain knowledge only through experimental things? Or can we get knowledge through other mediums? Many scientists today will say no, it's only through experiment. We believe in the experiment. Anything beyond the experiment we don't believe in it. And this is nonsense. Why is it nonsense? Is it because of religion? No. خلينا نتكلم, as I said, we'll talk rationally. First, and I mentioned this 2 weeks ago, there are 4 types of evidence, 4 types of proof. The strongest proof is الدليل الرياضي, the mathematical proof. 1 + 1 = 2. This is the strongest proof ever. Can you prove it scientifically? Impossible. You cannot scientifically prove that 1 + 1 = 2. How do you know this? This is self-evident fact. You cannot prove it. And the next reason, the next kind of evidence is الدليل العقلي, the rational proof. The part is smaller than the whole. الجزء أقل من الكل. في حد يختلف في دي؟ كيف أنا عرفتها؟ بالبداهة. I am born with this kind of knowledge. So the part is smaller than the whole. I cannot prove it scientifically. It is like that. These are self-evident facts. Without these self-evident facts, you cannot move forward to do anything. وبعدين, the third kind of fact of evidence is the experimental proofs. And this is what you do in the lab. And the last one is the senses. When you see, when you hear, this is the weakest kind of evidence. Because you see the sun, it looks like a quarter, but it is bigger than the earth almost 1 million times. So you cannot depend entirely on the senses. So this is one reason why we cannot say it's only experiment that decides what we believe in. Second, there are a lot of sciences that doesn't depend at all on experiments, and we must acknowledge it. History, for example. How do you prove to me scientifically that Aristotle once lived? How can you prove it scientifically? It's impossible, but everyone believes in it. How? Because of al-khabar al-sadiq, because of it is based on an authentic report. So if you're saying it's only the lab, this means that khalas, goodbye to history. Goodbye to your 15th grandfather. You don't know who he is, and you believe that he must have existed. So again, according to the experiments approach, it doesn't exist. These are the consequences. Ethics. We mentioned before that many, if you choose to be an atheist, this means that we are just a collection of atoms, of chemical interactions, and because we are just a collection or the result of some chemical interactions and cells, this means that there is nothing called good and evil. It's just chemical things. If you start talking about good and evil, this means that you assume God. You assume laws that is beyond the material. So again, this is another science, another field of knowledge that you have to rule out. And the third point, science can never answer the essential questions in life. And we'll talk about that in the second part of the khutbah. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه. لا إله إلا الله. الحمد لله وكفى والصلاة والسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى وبعد. To attain knowledge, we can never depend entirely on العلم التجريبي or experimental knowledge. Why? Because there are stronger proofs than experimental proofs. And there are many sciences that we believe in, and it has nothing to do with your lab. And third, there are questions that science can never explain, because it is beyond the scope of science itself. Science deals with things that can be observed, can be tested. How did the world start? This is beyond science. There is a very good book, I ask our youth to read it, written by Peter Medawar. He got the Nobel Prize in Medicine. And he said in his book, Advice to a Young Scientist, he said, the existence of a limit to science is made clear by its inability to answer childlike elementary questions having to do with first and last things. Questions such as, how did everything begin? And what are all here for? And what is the purpose of living anyway? That is why Max Planck, he also got the Nobel Prize in Physics, said, science cannot solve the ultimate mystery of nature, because we're part of nature and we're part of the mystery that we want to solve. So science can never deal with these questions, but we can never survive without knowing the answers to these questions. Otherwise, your life would be meaningless, will be purposeless. You don't know why are you here. You don't know where did you come from. You don't know where are you going to. This is what empirical proofs, if you insist on it, will lead you to. But you might say, no, I'm not talking about these things. I am talking about the idea that science contradicts faith, because science proved a lot of articles in faith wrong. You guys believe that the earth is 6,000 years old, and science now tells us empirically that it is 4.5 billion years. I see some Muslims saying that, and this is biblical. It's not a Quran problem. We don't believe that the earth is 6,000 years old. We don't care how old the earth is. The Quran is silent about that. So if it is 6,000, 600,000 billion years, it doesn't matter to us. So do not confuse biblical problems with what Islam stands for. So this one is not Quranic. We don't have a problem believing that the universe is 13.7 billion years. We don't have a problem believing that the earth is 4.5 billion years. It's not a problem. The Quran said, قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ فَانْظُرُوا كَيْفَ بَدَأَ الْخَلْقِ. Go travel throughout the land and see how the creation started. They might say, what about التطور? What about evolution? Doesn't it contradict the idea of creation? And التطور أيها الإخوة كثير من الناس لا يفهم هذا الأمر. هناك نوعان من التطور. في تطور صغروي بيقولوا عليه مايكرو ايفولوشن، وفي تطور كبروي اسمه ماكرو ايفولوشن. يعني ايه مايكرو وماكرو؟ Micro evolution is when in one species things evolve within one species, within one animal. And this can be observed and we don't have any problem with it. And most of evolution is about that. One animal developing over time. We don't have a problem with that. But the problem is with the macro evolution, that one animal turning into another by time. This is something scientifically that can never be observed. You can never observe something changing from a nature to another nature, from an animal to another complete animal. This can never be observed. So why do you insist that this is under the category of science? You said it is impairment. You said it is experiment. I mean, you said you're working in the lab, and now you're saying I have to assume that within billions of years things could have been different. But you're assuming that things have order, by the way. You're not assuming that with these billions of years there is chaos. So it is not as easy as some people do it. Again, there is no proof that of the macro evolution that something turned from something to another thing. They believe in this because with time this could be imagined. So it is nothing more than believing in the unseen that they blame the believers for. Gerald Kirkwood said, this theory about evolution, this theory can be called the general theory of evolution. And evidence that supports it is not sufficiently strong to allow us to consider it as anything more than a working hypothesis. So don't turn it into a fact. Even Richard Dawkins said, we must acknowledge, and this is the prophet of atheists now. He said, we must acknowledge that the possibility that new facts may come to light which will force our successors of the 21st century to abandon Darwinism or modify it beyond recognition. And there is, for those who are interested, there is a very good article and research published by, I think, Cambridge University by Sklar. And his article is called Theory and Truth, the Philosophical Critique Within Foundational Science. He had 3 critiques about the experimental people. And he said it's unobservable, idealization, and temporary occupants. يعني أشياء ممكن القاعدة تختل بعد زمن ما. أنا بقول هذا الكلام أيها الإخوة عشان أبنائنا so that our kids would not be obsessed too much with science in a way that makes them feel that خلاص, we don't need God. That is not true. Muslims are not against experimental proofs. Actually, Muslims founded it. Imam, and we're saying Imam Jabir ibn Hayyan, he was called Shaykh al-Kimyaiyin. He was the Sheikh of the chemistry people. He said in his book التجريد وملاك كمال هذه الصنعة، بيقول على علم الكيمياء، لأن فلاسفة اليونان كانوا بيقولوا الموضوع بس عقلي، لا هنجرب ولا نعمل. فالمسلمين أوجدوا موضوع التجريب، بيقول وملاك كمال هذه الصنعة العمل والتجربة، فمن لم يعمل ولم يجرب لم يظفر بشيء أبدا. جابر بن حيان in the Middle Ages is saying chemistry is all about work and experiments. The one who doesn't work and the one who doesn't do experiments will never attain anything. So we don't have a problem with experiments, but we're saying you must put science within its appropriate scope. Science does not deal with God. You cannot prove or disprove God with science. In science, you can give me data. The data could be right or wrong, and the data is subject to different interpretations. So science itself does not prove or disprove. Science gives you that kind of data. Even people know that Roger Bacon is a great fan of experimental knowledge, but there is a very good book by Robert Briffault called Making of Humanity. He's saying that this man, Roger Bacon, learned Arabic and Arabic sciences from the successors of Muslim Spain scholars. And he said he was no more than one of the apostles of Muslim sciences and methods to Christian Europe. ايه المشكلة؟ المشكلة مشكلة انبهار, fascination. Wow, cars, cell phones, laptops, so there is no God. ايه ده؟ It's the idea of fascination, that is it. To me, there is no difference between cars and camels. When Allah gave you the knowledge to develop these things and discover these things, it means there is no God. زي ما بيقولوا في علم الكلام الجهة منفكة. It's two different stories. But it is the fascination. It is turning science into an idol. And this is what, and I'll close with this, I know it's longer than usual. Imam al-Ghazali referred to this problem when he was dealing with the philosophers of his time. بيقول المسلمين, بيتكلم على المسلمين في عصره اللي افتتنوا بالعلم اليوناني. بيقول لما شافوا علوم الهندسة عند اليونان، كان زمان كلمة فلسفة تطلق على الهندسة والفلسفة نفسها والطب، كل ده كان اسمه فلسفة، ولذلك اسمه PhD Doctor of Philosophy. حتى لو انت scientist still اسمها philosophy. المهم بيقول لك لما تدرس الناس بتوع الفلسفة لما يتكلموا عن العلوم الرياضية ده يقينية، 1 زائد 1 بيساوي 2. فلما يجوا يتكلموا عن الإلهيات تظن ان اليقين بنفس درجة اليقين في المحسوسات. وبيقول لهم لا، أنا ممكن أقبل كلامهم في الرياضيات، لكن في الإلهيات we can talk about that. So Imam al-Ghazali is criticizing the attitude, the fascination of the people of his time with Greek philosophy, because the word philosophy was so big that it includes medicine, logic, mathematics, and all of that. So he's saying when those Muslims who were fascinated with these sciences recognized that mathematical proofs and equations never fail and it guarantees certainty, they thought that the Greek contribution to knowledge about God or theology must be as certain. And he said we need to differentiate between the two. We accept the science, mashallah, great people discovered a lot of things, make things easier. But just because you made all of these discoveries does not mean I'll accept your interpretation that there is no God. This is a completely different story. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide all of us. I had a lot to say, but that should be enough, inshallah. Allahumma hdina wahdi bina waj'alna sababa wa sabila liman ihtada. Allahumma arzuqna al-iman وجنبنا سبل الشيطان. اللهم حبب إلينا الإيمان وزينه في قلوبنا وكره إلينا الكفر والفسوق والعصيان. اللهم آت نفوسنا تقواها وزكها يا رب أنت خير من زكاها أنت وليها ومولاها. اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك على نبينا محمد كلما ذكره الذاكرون وغفل عن ذكره الغافلون. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.